come up. But we're talking about the pillars of creation. Last time I talked about part 1. I talked about the first pillar, which was the Sabbath, we said. And today I'm going to talk about the second pillar that God established at creation. It's a very, very important pillar. And I entitled this pillar Marriage/Family, all right? And you'll understand what I'm talking about as we go into the sermon today. But in order for us to understand what this pillar is all about, we must look at the foundational principle, which is the nature of humanity. We are not going to understand marriage or family if we don't look deeper at creation and understand the nature of humanity. I'd like to clarify one thing very quickly before I start, is that even though we're talking about this pillar as number 2, actually it was before the Sabbath, right? In creation. Family and marriage was created before the Sabbath on day 6. And I just arbitrarily chose to speak first Sabbath on, about the Sabbath and this time. So when I say number 1, number 2 is just arbitrary, okay? Don't think about the order in creation. Today we're going to talk about the second pillar, the marriage and family. When I look at the creation story, there is one thing that is very clear to us. The concept of family is incomplete without the concept of marriage. And the same is true about both of these two. The concept of family and marriage, they're both incomplete without the concept of humanity. So that's why I want to go to the roots of this issue. We can talk about the family and marriage, but we have to go deeper than that and talk about the nature of humanity. God first formed man and woman, and then He joined them together in marriage, which set the foundation for the family, right? That's how we see the creation story. Then God told them to be fruitful and multiply. In other words, He told them to grow their family so that other families could be created afterwards. I want you to go with me to Genesis chapter 1. And we'll stay the most of the sermon in Genesis chapter 1. Verses 26 to 28. Genesis 1, 26 to 28. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." Verse 27. So God created man in His own image. In the image of God, He created him. Male and what? Female. That's very, very important. Male and female, He created them. Verse 28, then God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth." It is very interesting, before we go and look very closely to these few verses, it is very interesting to see from the creation story one pattern that after every day God created something, He said something. He said what? It was good. And then He said it was good, and then day 1 was good, day 2, and so on and so forth. Only after He creates humanity, He says something else. What did He say? It was very good. Everything was good, but it was incomplete until He created humanity, male and female, and joined them into marriage, and thus starting the family. It was something special about the humanity. God said that all of creation was good, but nothing yet resembled Him. Nothing bore His image until He created humanity. So God chose to create a special being with the unique capacity to be like him. This creation would be able to reflect the glory of God, display the character of God, and have a special understanding of God, and even the capacity to love and worship him. So as we read Genesis 1, verse 26 to 28, this is where God puts the second, the pillar of creation that we're talking about. And the most important aspect of this pillar we're talking about today is the creation of humanity in the image of God. We can talk a lot about family and marriage, but the problem starts before then. At the foundations stands the basic principle, male and female being created in the image of God. And I'm going to spend the rest of my sermon talking about the image of God in us, because I think this is a very, very important principle at creation that sets the foundation for everything today. And unfortunately, Satan is trying to attack this pillar very heavily today, the image of God at creation. So let's look at this a little bit. When we read verse 27 and 28 in Genesis chapter 1, the Hebrew word for man is Adam, and you can hear the name of Adam, right? And it's this word that we translate. In our translation, said God created man in his own image. But that word is Adam, which translates what? Humanity. It's both male and female. It's not just the man. And I want you to understand that, because that's important. Then God goes later and he divides this into two subcategories. Humanity is being divided into what two categories? Male and female. And I want you to see very carefully, was only Adam created in God's image? No. Eve was created in God's image as well. And that's an important point that we're going to discuss as we go into the sermon. These two subcategories of mankind are male and female. I read an article from Steve Ham, and one of his article argues, and I agree with him. He said that the main idea behind the fact about the humans being created in the image of God is the great distinction. I want you to remember that, because from now on in our sermon, in this sermon, it's going to be about distinction. I want you to see in the biblical account of creation, God comes with creation of man, and he wants to make sure that we understand that when he creates man in the image of God, in his own image, he wants us to understand that's for a purpose to make a distinction between the humans and everything else that he created before. And it's very clear from the text. Go with me to verse 25. Genesis 1, verse 25. And God made the beasts of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was what? It was good. Now, let me ask you a question. This happens in day 6, right? The creation of animals. Was God done with day 6? Then why this formula? It was good. God before used this formula only at the end of the day. If you look first day, second, third, fourth, and fifth, he said it was good, and then it says it was a day, evening, and the morning day 1, day 2. You see what I'm saying? On day 6, God creates the animals and the birds and everything, and then he says it was good. Almost to sound like the day's over. He was finished creating, but was he really finished? No, he wasn't. So there is a hint here that what follows next, it's something different. He even put it in the text of the Bible to show that the creation of humanity is something different. He wanted us to make this distinction between the animals that were created and the humanity. So we find that in the text. But there is more than that. The biggest point of distinction here, if we go verse 25, then in verse 26, God starts this way. Then God said, let us make what? Man, meaning humanity, humans, in our image according to our likeness. This right there is the main distinction between the humans and the animals. And what is that? We are made in God's image. And I'm driving this home because this is going to be very important as we get later into the sermon. The distinctiveness between the humans and animals. God wanted to make sure that they're different. And the image of God in us shows that distinctiveness between us and the animals. So a question that has been asked many times in history, and today we always ask, what does it mean to be created in the image of God? What is the image of God in us? And I'm going to give you a few aspects of the image of God. There's many others, but we're going to go quickly through those for the lack of time right now. You know, having the image of God means in the simplest terms that we were made to what? To resemble God, right? An image and an exact representation of the original. So as humans, we were made to resemble God's character, right? That's what we're made for. So let's look at that. But there is a few different aspects of that. A lot of people think that when God created us, when it says in image and likeness, it represents our physical appearance. Do we look like God physically? Anybody? No, we don't. Does God have a body like we do, a physical body? Does he have that? We can agree to disagree on that one. A lot of people discuss that. If God had a body, why did Jesus have to take a body when he came here on earth? So God has a different type of a body, right? He has a form. Humans do not resemble God in the sense of having flesh and blood. Why I say that? Because flesh and blood, our body, they limit us. God has no limitation, right? If I'm in a human body, can I be in the same place at the same time? It's a limitation. Our flesh and blood is a limitation to us. Now, John 4, verse 24 says what? God is what? God is spirit. Now, I'm not saying he doesn't have a form. Don't misunderstand me. What I'm saying is he doesn't have a limited body like we have. So God, we don't resemble God physically. We resemble him in other aspects. So let me give you two important aspects, the way we resemble God. The first one is a rational or cognitive aspect. Human qualities such as rationality and cognitive capacity constitute the image of God in us. We have freedom to choose, don't we? Do animals have that? They don't. They base their lives on what? On instincts. We have cognitive capacities. That's what God gave us that is different from the animals. You can see that differentiation. That's what the image of God is in us. One of the aspects is that cognitive capacity. This is how we reflect God, by using our freedom of choice and using it wisely. God gave us that freedom to choose. The way we use that is representing God or is misrepresenting God. Part of being made in God's image is that Adam had the capacity to make free choices. Did he make a good choice when it came to the temptation? Adam and Eve didn't make a good choice. They sinned. And since then, in doing so, they marred the image of God within us as humans and passed the damaged image to their descendants. Today we still bear the image of God, but we also bear the scars of sin. We bear that sinful consequences of sin in our image. So mentally, morally, and socially, and physically, we show the effects of sin in our lives today. The good news is that when God redeems an individual, He begins to do what? To restore the image of God. That's what happens. That's the miracle. It's a recreation of that image in us. When we accept Christ, God says to us in 2 Corinthians 5:17, one of my favorite verses, it says that when we are in Christ, we are what? A new creation. What it happens there, the image of God is being restored in us. Those cognitive capacities, the ability to think and choose to serve God instead of doing evil, are being restored in us, and we can choose to serve God. So that's number one aspect. The second aspect, this is most important to me, is the relational aspect. And that's where I want to spend a little bit of the sermon today, the relational aspect. Being made in God's image entails living in relationship with God and others. Humanity was created for fellowship. This is distinct from animals as well. Even though animals can have relationships with each other and they can relate to humans, but once again, that is based on instincts. Humans can choose to be in a relationship or not. Our relationships are a choice. I hope that when you got married, it was your own choice. Was it? You had the ability to choose who you're going to enter into that marriage relationship with. Today, when you choose your friends, that's why it says, the saying says, choose your friends what? Wisely, because you do have a choice. This relational aspect shows the image of God in us. God is relational being, as it was mentioned in the children's story. He wanted to relate to us, and we can relate to Him. One of the main characteristics of God's character is His love. So God created us in His image as relational beings so that we can relate to each other and relate to Him. Now, there are two basic human relationships that are mentioned in the creation story. First, the man and woman relationship within marriage. God said in the beginning that He created male and female in His image. So whenever we follow God's design in marriage and have a loving relationship, we resemble the relational aspect of the image of God in us. I want you to remember that because this is very important. Whenever we follow God's principle for biblical marriage, we resemble God's image in us. The other relationship is mentioned when God blessed man and woman in Genesis 1:28, when He said, "Be fruitful and multiply." And this envisions that they will create a family, they will have children. And the other relation within the family bonds is what? Parents and children. Whenever we have a relationship, a loving relationship between parents and children, I want you parents to listen very careful. Whenever we have that loving relationship between parents and children, we resemble the image of God. Having said that, there are many other human relationships. We relate to other people such as friends, co-workers, neighbors, our members here, church family members, etc., etc. The way we treat people in our daily relationships is an indication whether the image of God has been restored in us or not. The way we treat others, the way we relate to others really shows whether the image of God has been restored in us or not. So let me ask you a question, church. How do you treat others? How do you relate to others? Do you resemble God's image in you when you relate to other people, to your spouse, to your children, and to everyone around you? Do you resemble God's image? I read this interesting illustration about a Dutch bicycle manufacturer and Van Moof, M-O-O-F. Sounds funny, but they make good bicycles, I hear. And they had a problem. They start selling bicycles online, and when they shipped them, a lot of them got damaged. All right? Because they put them in a box, and people are careless. Oh, it's a bike. It will be okay, And so a lot of them got damaged to a point where they almost went out of business. People were returning the bikes back. So one of the managers had a very, very bright idea. He saw that their boxes, the size of their boxes, were the same size as a big flat screen TV, all right? It was almost the same size. So what he thought, he says, why don't we put on our box a big flat screen TV instead of just the bike? So they start doing this. They put a big flat screen TV, and on the screen of the TV, just a small little bike. I looked at the picture. And he thought that if they printed that, people would be more careful, because what's in the box matters how you take care of that. Why do you always label careful, fragile, right? Because of the content of the box. What's in the box really matters. Do you know that after they start doing that, their damaged goods were reduced by 70 to 80%? When we value what's in the box, we treat the box with greater care. When we understand that people have been imprinted with the very image of God, we treat people with greater care. I want you to look at your neighbor who is sitting beside you, and I want you to see that there is an imprint of the image of God in them. I want you to look at your spouse when you get home very careful, and look at them and think of it. There is an imprint of the image of God. So how do we treat people shows to others whether the image of God is in us or not. But listen, there's something even more than that. When you have a box, usually you put the price tag on the box. Don't we do that? We possess God's image, but we have also been bought and redeemed by the sacrifice of the Son of God. Amen? That means that every person you meet has a price tag placed on him or her by God Himself, and the value is the life of Jesus Christ. So when you look at your spouse, you look at your children, you look at your co-workers, everyone that you meet in the society today, you think about that. There is an imprint of the image of God, but more than that, there is a price tag. It's the life of Jesus Christ. Christ paid for that person. So how you treat others in your relationships. It's a very important aspect, the relational aspect of the image of God in us. In the few minutes that I have left here, I'm talking here about a pillar that God set at creation. And I know that you know how Satan has been trying to destroy this pillar. He's been trying very hard to destroy families, marriages, and he's been trying to destroy the image of God in us. There are three main ways that Satan is attacking the image of God, and by extension, he is attacking family and attacking marriages. First is by introducing a counterfeit pillar, and he's been using that very well, which we call theory of evolution. The evolution came in as a counterfeit pillar, I call it, because it's an alternative to creation. There is another way that the world has been created. This theory of evolution slowly became the foundational pillar on which the society builds their view of the universe. And Darwin's evolutionary view of origins has allowed mankind to remove God from the picture completely. If God is removed, the image of God in us is removed as well. As I said earlier, the image of God in us, it's what sets us apart from the other creation, from animals. And the whole point is to show the distinctiveness. Remember that? I have emphasized this a few times. When evolution came, it removed that distinctiveness. You see how Satan cunningly does that? What does evolution say? We slowly evolved from animals. There is no distinction between the humans and animals. So the image of God is removed right there. Because originally the image of God was to show the distinctiveness between the other creation. And Satan cleverly, working in the background through the powers, brought that into existence. Evolution completely destroys the image of God in humans. But in recent years, Satan has intensified the attack on two other fronts. God said in the beginning that he created male and female in his own image. Satan is destroying the biblical view of gender and marriage today. And that's his greatest attack right now. Marriage is not considered anymore to be between a male and female, and thus the pillar of creation is being destroyed. I want you to understand me here very carefully. Some of you might misinterpret what I'm saying here. I'm going back to the pillars of creation. I'm going back to how God set this world in motion and the beginning of it. To look at the beginning, the principles that God set in place. I'm not talking here about not accepting people that have a different view. I'm talking about how God set it up for us. Am I making myself clear? I wanted you to understand that because some of you would come to me and say, but shouldn't we accept the people that think differently than us? Yes, we should. It's a relational aspect of the image of God. We should love everyone, right? And treat them exactly like Jesus would treat them because Jesus died for those people, all right? But what I'm talking about here today is how God set this up right from the beginning. He knew what he was doing, didn't he? He knew what he was doing, and we must trust in that and go back to the roots. So let me continue. A few more minutes. Give this few more minutes to me and give your attention to me, please. Because there is another dangerous attack in regards to this pillar. Satan is trying to destroy this pillar, the image of God in us, by gender identity issue. Children today are told that they can decide what gender they want to be. It's not what God said it in the beginning, it's whatever you want. You can choose what gender you want to be. This issue is called today, and you can research it as parents. I encourage you to look at that. It's frightening what's happening. This issue is called gender neutrality or gender fluidity. The society today promotes this as something normal, and we are at the point where this issue is being forced on us by legislative powers. If you just type gender neutrality, yes, you would find so many stories from all around the world. It's not just here. In UK, one family, they said to the nanny not to call their kids with the pronouns he or she anymore. Just use neutral pronouns. In the United States, in California, in some schools, you can't call kids with the he, she pronoun as God set in the beginning. You have to call them with gender-neutral pronouns. Why are we going there? Look at our place here in Alberta. We are close, and we are there where we are told that the kids can decide. Since when kids can decide for themselves? God put the parents there to make decisions for the children. until they reach the age of accountability, when they can make their own decisions. That's why God put that responsibility on the shoulders of parents. So now we are being told that the kids can decide. As young as 5-year-olds, they can decide for themselves whether they want to be a boy or a girl. God set this pillar in the beginning. He created male and female in His image. There is nothing else we can do. You can try to destroy that pillar. You can try to remove it, to take it down, but we can't because it's set there by God Himself. This issue has been wrapped in a very nice wrapping paper. You hear people talking about stereotypes in regards to males or females. Have you heard that? That's where, it's stereotypes, So we want equality there. It's fine. But Satan deceitfully and cleverly introduced this issue. And people that are for this idea, gender neutrality, they say we are doing this only to remove the stereotypes. There is a bigger agenda there, in my personal opinion, than just removing stereotypes. This is Satan's agenda that hits straight at God's image. It tries to destroy the pillar that God set at creation. Since when being created a male or female or a boy or a girl is stereotyping. There is no stereotyping in calling someone male or female because both were created equally in God's image. Remember, I told you to remember that both were created equally in God's image, yet different in function. God set it up that way because it works well. Remember when God created male and female, He said afterwards that it was what? Very good. Why would we want to take something that was very good and try to reinterpret, destroy it, and say it doesn't work good, it will work better this way? Why do we want to do that? Gender neutrality issue tries to erase the distinctiveness between genders. God created in the beginning male and female for a reason. Everything that God does has a purpose. Nothing in creation was just because He wanted to do it. God created two genders for the purpose of creating marriage and by extension creating the family. If gender is being blurred, then marriage and family is destroyed as well. Ministry of Healing, page 397. I love this quote. Next to the angelic beings, the human family formed in the image of God are the noblest of His created works. God desires them to become all that He had made it possible for them to be, and to do their very best with the powers He has given them. When God created us in His image, He gave us a great power. God's image in us makes it possible for us to do our best. But unfortunately, it seems to me today that our society is going into the wrong direction. In order to progress and to do our best with God's image, instead of progressing and trying to do the best with God's image in us, we are regressing and going the other way. Now, one last point. We can point finger at the society there and say, hey, it's out there. They are destroying the image of God. But what about here? It shouldn't surprise us that it's out there because God told us, Jesus told us in the last days would be worse than in the days of Noah, right? It shouldn't surprise us that the degradation of morality in the society. It shocks us because it happens so quickly, but it shouldn't surprise us. We can point the fingers at the problems out there, but Satan has done a great job to destroy the relational aspect of the image of God in churches as well. He's doing a great job with our families and our marriages to destroy them. And it might not be those issues that I've talked about, that one of the issues is our business of life. The cares of this world and the business of life is destroying our families today and our marriages. We don't have time anymore to communicate and have a relationship with our spouses, with our children. And that is what the church is guilty of. Our families are falling apart as well. And not because of those other issues, but Satan is doing a great job to destroy this pillar that God set at creation. So, if the image of God is destroyed in us, that we don't have any identity and we don't have any purpose in life. I encourage you today to hold fast to the Word of God. I encourage you today to stand fast on His Word and stand for God's principles that He set in the beginning at creation. The image of God in us is a pillar of creation that Satan is trying to destroy. Don't let Satan do that. Let us hold fast to that pillar. May God bless you. Amen.